Sandro de Strozzi de Montefeltro from the Kingdom of Calentier. And I want to thank the Kingdom of the Middle for giving me the opportunity to teach this class to you. Again, it's going to be a basic class on period pickling techniques. It's not going to be really in depth, but it's definitely going to be enough to get you by, get you started in the world of pickling. If you do have any questions, feel free to chime in as you are able to. Just unmute yourself and chime in with your question. We'll kind of answer the questions as they come up. We'll start with a little bit of vocabulary, since some of this we're going to get to sort of a very, very scientific level as far as how effective period practices were, as far as the inhibiting of various pathogens compared to modern food safety standards. So, having that vocabulary beforehand is going to make things a little bit easier, as well as some of the words that I'm going to use, more just the way I phrase things, as far as one word meaning something slightly different. So as far as the scientific, the scientific vocabulary, we're going to be concerned with two main metrics as far as food safety goes when we get into all of that. The first is pH. For those of you who don't know, pH is a measure of how acidic something is. It is on a scale of 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral, everything below 7 being acidic, everything above 7 being basic. And the farther you get away from 7, the more acidic or more basic it is. Some common examples is lemon juice with a pH of about 2, vinegar with a pH of about 2 or 3, water with a pH of around 7, baking soda with a pH of about 9, and ammonia, which is around 11. The second scientific metric that we are concerned with is a metric known as water activity. Now, water activity is not a measure of how dry something is. Now, how dry something is can impact water activity, but what it is a measure of water that is available for biological purposes. And so it's just free available water for other cells or other organisms to make use of. So some common examples, with this being on a scale of 0 being absolutely bone dry to 1 being pure water, you have fresh meat and vegetables with a water activity of approximately 0.99. Something like salami having an average water activity of 0.82. Your dried fruits have a water activity of 0.06 to approximately 0.65. And I say these numbers because one other thing is, as I said before, just because something is dry doesn't mean it has a low water activity, or just because something is wet doesn't mean it has a high water activity. Because at room temperature, and room temperature being 20 degrees Celsius to approximately 68 degrees Fahrenheit, a saturated solution of sodium chloride of table salt has a water activity of 0.755. So, a jar of liquid actually has a lower water activity than something like salami. So that covers our two big scientific terms that we're going to be coming across. And so as far as critters we're dealing with, we're mostly going to be concerned with bacteria and molds, things like that. I'm just going to use the word pathogens to use that as sort of an umbrella term. And whenever I am saying brine, whenever I'm using the word brine, unless otherwise stated, I am using that in the context of a saltwater solution, not a vinegar plus saltwater solution. So I'm just going to, again, if I say brine, it is just salt water, not vinegar and salt water, or vinegar and salt. So that being said, we're going to start off very simple with the pickling recipe that got me started in all of this, which was written in Calomella's De Re Rustica, so an older Roman text. And Calomella provides us with the following recipe. When the vinegar and brine are ready, around midsummer, it will be time to pickle the following vegetables for later use: sprouts, cabbage stalks, capers, parsley stalks, rue, unopened buds of Alexanders, the unopened flower of fennel and its stalk, the unopened flower of wild turnip, both wild and cultivated briny flower, asparagus, leek, pennyroyal, catmint, wild thyme, mustard, samphire, and the tender stalks of fennel. All of these herbs can be easily pickled in a combination of 2 parts vinegar and 1 part brine. Only bryony, black bryony, asparagus, turnips, calamint, and samphire need to be laid out separately on baskets. So looking at this, particularly with the items that are mentioned to be laid out separately on baskets. So there are a lot of things on there that are already, fairly dry as we think of them, especially things like turnips, mustard. A fair bit of that is green, but it's not like something like celery that has sort of a high natural water content. But we do encounter the asparagus, and actually does suggest the turnips be laid out as well. And what I personally interpret this to be is a preliminary drying step. Usually what I'll do is I'll just take like a wire rack, lay out the vegetables. So again, this is from Calomella's De Re Rustica. Again, an earlier Roman author. I will actually type that out for you. There we go. So again, by Calomella. And so what that drying step is going to do, I usually just lay them out on a wire rack on the counter, maybe throw a fan over to keep the air moving, is a preliminary step to lower the water activity. It's not going to lower it. It's not going to lower it a whole lot. It's not like you threw it in a dehydrator or something like that, or a warm oven or something like that. That's really going to desiccate the asparagus. But it is definitely pulling water out, and by virtue of that, sort of making room, for lack of better phrasing, for this mixture of 2 parts vinegar and 1 part brine. So obviously that's going to be a fairly high acidity, low pH mixture. And and with the very low water activity of the brine, you have a very stable, a very sort of safe mixture to pickle your vegetables in. Now, when I do make this, I do still, so I will mix the saturated saltwater brine and the vinegar. I will mix those in a pot. I will bring them to a boil, and I will I'll put the vegetables, the asparagus, whatever, into a jar, and I will pour the boiling mixture into the jar. Now, theoretically, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that. Calomello doesn't really explain, like, doesn't really tell you to do that. A lot of sources don't really suggest, hot packing, something like that, for those of you who are familiar with modern canning practices. But I do it as sort of it makes me feel a little bit better. And if you take any of my other classes, you'll know that while I do like following the letter of the instructions that are provided, I do still take some modern safety precautions, because nobody wants botulism. And I do not want to be the reason that somebody gets botulism, somebody gets E. coli, somebody gets salmonella. I want to make sure that nobody gets anything like that, because those are awful, awful things to get. Believe me, I've done the research. Well, other people have done the research. I have read the research. So, looking at that, we're going to detour as far as all of the water activity and things like that. Actually, we won't. So there is the vinegar pickling. Another option for pickling is fermentation. So if any of you have had like sauerkraut, the Korean kimchi, anything like that is a fermented pickle. You can do it with cabbage. I've done it with Brussels sprouts. You can do it with like carrots. There's a whole list of things that you can ferment. Now, much like Calomella's vinegar pickling, you are making use of acidity and salt to preserve. Now, instead of coming from vinegar, what you are doing is the salt that you're applying to your cabbage or your Brussels sprouts or your carrots, whatever you're fermenting, creates an environment that is conducive to the growth of lactobacillus, which is a beneficial bacteria. And what it does is, it consumes like sugars and things like that, and it produces lactic acid, which is the preservative in your sauerkraut, in your kimchi, and your other fermented pickles. And this technique, the fermentation, can also be applied to meats. It's actually not uncommon with a number of different salamis and things like that to have to purposefully incorporate a beneficial lactobacillus culture to lower the acidity of the sausage that you're making, to help improve product safety, to help improve food safety. Now, as far as something later in period, we have the opera of Bartolomeo Scappi, who actually describes keeping chicken breast pickled in vinegar. So the pickling technique that is described by Calamella is not exclusive to vegetables. In theory, you could use it on fruits. You could use, I mean, I've used it to pickle eggs, like hard-boiled eggs. It's a very flexible, but you do need to make sure that you're cognizant of of what changes you need to make, if any, particularly with the boiled eggs. Pickling those, there can be some problems with that. But what Bartolomeoscopy provides for us in the opera Bartolomeoscopy, and for those who don't know, opera in this case is not it's not used to describe a piece of musical theater. Rather, opera is used as the work. You may have heard the term magnum opus, with opus being the singular. And so magnum opus is this great work. And Scopi's opera is sort of this big collected, these works of Bartolomeo Scopi. A later period Italian chef, sort of one of the first celebrity chefs, worked in the Vatican, worked for the Pope, prepared food for the Pope, prepared food for the cardinals, and so has a very involved book as far as different recipes and not just recipes, but how the kitchen needs to be laid out. If you're traveling, what all do you need to pack to have your traveling kitchen? What was it like to serve the cardinals when they were in conclave? Things like that, along with the huge number of recipes. So he provides us with various salted fowl preserved in oil and rendered fat. Now, the title is a little, like, I don't want to say the title is misleading, but the rendered fat is sort of the main thrust of this particular recipe in Scopi's opera. But towards the end, we'll get to the actual pickling. So every salted fowl, such as geese, cranes, wild ducks, barnyard doves, and other fowl, once they are out of the brine and with the brine well washed off them, are dried in moderate smoke or in open air. So this first step, what Scopi is instructing is, brining the fowl in salt water. Now, it's important to note that he also mentions having the brine well washed off. Now, if you're preserving something like this, where it's sort of a multi-step thing, and you're starting off with the application of salt to pull out moisture to lower that water activity, it is important to sort of remove that excess salt, because that can make it very unpalatable. And again, he's saying, brine it, salt it, let it dry. To store them after a long time, after they've hung in smoke, preserve them in oil. Fowl that are salted are used more in cool places than in warm, and in places where the meat of quadrupeds is scarce. Ortolans, fig peckers, and other small birds, after being kept for 6 days in brine, so you are keeping it in brine for a significant amount of time, which again, increasing salinity, which lowers water activity, which makes it safer. We'll get to why it makes it safer, and some of those metrics. Yes. There we go. So again, the opera Bartolomeoscopy And as I mentioned in the chat, I do use the Terence Scully translation, which is probably the most common translation. That was, and it's published by the University of Toronto Press. So it's this wonderful. Let's see if we can get that in frame. So, again, it's an absolutely wonderful textbook. It's it's not a small book. It has wonderful diagrams. How you should have your kitchens set up, things like that. Very very handy resource, especially for late Italian cookery. So after being kept in for 6 days in brine and removed and put in liquefied fat that contains fennel seeds in an earthenware vessel, letting the lard congeal about the birds. So this isn't pickling yet. There's like the next little bit is going to be discussing the pickling, but it is important to mention because since we have the recipe here, since we're talking about it, the fact that you're putting the birds into liquefied fat and letting that congeal around the bird is what that's going to do is that is going to reduce the amount of air that is available. And for some pathogens, that's a good thing. Not so much with botulism, but that's a slightly different thing, and we'll get to that. Alternatively, those small birds can be kept in well-salted vinegar that contains garlic, cloves, and crushed pepper. I have seen them done both ways and brought from Cyprus to Venice. For best storage, they must always be in a cool place. So rather than having brine and vinegar, Scapi actually sort of bypasses the brine and just adds salt to vinegar. And again, it's seasoned, and it should be noted that the garlic does have a bit of a sort of an antimicrobial property to it, but that is not going to be doing the heavy lifting as far as the food safety of this goes. Is it doing something? Probably. But again, it's not the antimicrobial properties of the garlic are not doing most of the work for this. So as far as the pathogens, so there are sort of two and a half categories of pathogen as far as like the bacteria go. There is aerobic, which requires oxygen. So the liquefied lard that's congealed around the bird, sort of removing that oxygen, is helpful against them. Then there is anaerobic, which doesn't require oxygen. And Clostridium botulinum is actually a wonderful example of this. This is why botulism is prevalent in cans, because a lot of these cans are sealed, are low oxygen environments, which Clostridium botulinum really doesn't care. It doesn't need the oxygen to multiply. There's also facultative anaerobes, which are capable of switching back and forth, but I don't know if I actually have any on this list. Actually, I've got a couple. I've got 3 of the 4 pathogens we'll discuss actually on this list. So probably one of the most dangerous pathogens, or at least one that we most commonly associate with pickling, is Clostridium botulinum, sometimes known as CBOT, but this is the pathogen that causes botulism. Now, it should be noted that the pathogen itself does not cause the botulism. It is actually a neurotoxin that Clostridium botulinum produces that causes botulism. So it's kind of one of the reasons. So with Clostridium botulinum, the minimum water activity for growth, so getting back to that vocab, the minimum water activity for growth for that is 0.9353. So anything lower than that is going to inhibit the growth of Clostridium botulinum. The minimum pH for growth is 4.6. So anything more acidic than 4.6 is going to inhibit growth. And preservatives such as nitrites, so your curing salts, which I use whenever I'm preserving meat, also inhibits the growth of Clostridium botulinum. Now, that being said, inhibiting the growth of Clostridium botulinum does not necessarily make something safe in the long term. Clostridium botulinum is a little bit different as far as the way it exists. CBOT, Clostridium botulinum, has sort of two different phases that it can exist in. There is a vegetative cell, which, if conditions around it are not conducive to growth, then it will sort of lock itself away. It'll make sort of an impermeable shell around itself. So it's very, very hard to destroy. This is why we pressure can. Because with a pressure canner, you can get high enough temperatures because of the pressure to start destroying Clostridium botulinum vegetative cells. So there's that, which, again, if conditions are not conducive to growth, it will lock itself down. Then there is the active cell, which is capable of growing, multiplying, and producing the neurotoxin. So the vegetative cell cannot produce the neurotoxin. It can't really do much of anything because it's locked itself in a cage. It's in a shell. And then there's the active cell that is, that is producing. It's growing. It's multiplying. It is producing the neurotoxin. As far as getting rid of that neurotoxin, which is also why we do pressure canning, 100% of the neurotoxin is inactivated after about 10 minutes at boiling. So it's not a matter of start the burner, set a timer. Once you have a good strong boil of whatever it is, go. And again, if you have jars in a pot, especially if you're doing just a water bath canning, when the water comes to a boil, you don't start the timer yet. Ideally, you would have a temperature probe in one of the jars that when the middle of the jars, when the entire contents of the jar gets to 100 C, 212 Fahrenheit, that's when the 10 minutes starts. Again, this is why we pressure can, because you can get to you can get to higher temperatures And then that way you can really make sure that you are reaching that internal temperature of 100 Celsius. The next pathogen we're going to talk about is Listeria, which again, you really don't want to get this. Nobody really wants to get this. You really don't want to get any of these. Some are a little bit not as bad as others, but Clostridium Botulinum is definitely probably one of the worst ones. So Listeria is one of those facultative anaerobes, so that is capable of existing in aerobic and anaerobic without locking itself down like Clostridium Botulinum. So that one has a minimum water activity for growth of 0.90. So again, you know, your fresh meats are going to be an issue, but as you get down to like something like salami or beef jerky, water activity is not necessarily going to be as much of an issue. A minimum pH of 4.4, so you're still pretty well above the acidity or the pH for something like lemon juice or vinegar. And so with that one, 90% of the organisms are rendered inactive or destroyed after 10 seconds at 70 C. So mathematically speaking, it's actually what's known as a log 10. I believe it's a log 10% or log 10 amount is destroyed. So, you know, the first 10 seconds is going to be approximately 90% of what's there. Then the next 10 seconds is going to be 90% of what's left, and then 90% of what's left, and about 90% of what's left. And going through and through and through, which again is why I tend to hot pack. So, you know, I've got hot jars, I've got hot vinegar brine mixture or a hot vinegar mixture or whatever is going into the jars, so I can make sure that I've got a good boil for a good amount of time to make sure that things are going to be safer. You can't necessarily guarantee it's going to be safe, but there are definitely a lot of steps that one can take to hedge your bets. So again, Listeria is fairly easy to deal with. You know, it doesn't have a very low threshold for water activity. It doesn't have a very low threshold for pH, and the inactivation time and temperature, it's not too difficult. It doesn't require really special tools. You don't need a pressure canner for dealing with Listeria. Then we'd come to the bacteria Salmonella. So there's another one of those that can alternate between aerobic and anaerobic as it needs to. And with those, as far as, you know, having oxygen, not having oxygen, those ones make it a little bit trickier. You know, with aerobic, it's, you know, like it's simple, you know, vacuum pack it, seal the jar, whatever, get all the oxygen out. The ones that can sort of bounce between the two make it a little bit harder. So that's something to be cognizant of. Salmonella actually has an even higher water activity threshold for growth at 0.94. So even something, you know, like bread has a water activity of 0.91. So that gives you an idea of hopefully it gives you an idea of how dryness and water activity aren't necessarily tied, but also the fact that there's not there's not a lot of space for salmonella to grow. But it does have a lower pH threshold at 3.8. So this is when you need to be a little bit more mindful as far as the pH goes, because when you are, even if you're doing something like Scappi's chicken, like the pickled chicken that I described, you need to account for the pH of whatever is being pickled, because odds are whatever is being pickled has a higher pH than what it's being pickled in. So you may have, salted it a good bit, which that's definitely going to do a lot, especially for salmonella. But some of these other pathogens that might be able to tolerate lower water activities, but maybe, not as tolerant of a lower pH, you need to make sure that you're at least cognizant of the fact that it's like, well, if I take vinegar and salt water and I put them together, the pH is going to be a little bit different than just vinegar. Or if I take a large amount of chicken and put it in a jar of vinegar, then the overall pH of that mixture, like if I were to take that and run it through a blender and liquefy it and homogenize it, that entire mixture is not going to have nearly the pH of just vinegar. So yes, vinegar has a pH of anywhere between 2 and 3, but chicken doesn't. The inactivation temperature and time for salmonella. So again, this is going to be like destruction of the bacteria, is so that log 10 reduction within 1 minute at 70 C. So again, 90% of what's there. I get another minute, 90% of what's there, 90% of what's there, 90% of what's there. So whenever I do this vinegar brine mixture boils, I usually boil it. Once I have a good strong boil, I'm usually going to boil it for about 10 minutes. And I usually make enough of the mixture that is about 3/4 of the volume of the number of jars that I'm dealing with. So if I'm making like 4 quarts of pickles, I'll prepare approximately 3/4, 3 quarts of brine, and that usually works out. I'll have a little bit extra. But if you want to, you can always just make enough brine equal to the volume of however many jars or vessels you're dealing with. And so the last bacteria is going to be E. coli, another one a lot of people know, and also another one of those facultative anaerobes. So little switcheroos. That has a very, very high, a relatively high minimum water activity for growth at 0.950. And if you are using acetic acid, that is particularly effective. So acetic acid is the acidic component of vinegar. The minimum pH for growth when using acetic acid for E. coli is 5.1. So if you have a mixture of acetic acid that has a pH of 5.1, you are already inhibiting the growth of E. coli. So it makes it really hard for E. coli to survive in pickles because of that very reason. Because acetic acid is just, for most of us, the go-to acid for pickling. And the inactivation temperature of that for the log 10 is 10 seconds at 64.3 Celsius. I don't remember what any of these numbers are in Fahrenheit because I snagged a lot of these from basically the New Zealand equivalent of the FDA, as I understand it. And I can also make both of my bits of documentation available. 148F. Thank you. So that is. Let's try that. Okay, so anyone with the link should be able to view that. So that first link is going to be the Pickle research, Pickle documentation that I did in 2014. And the second link is going to be a bit of the research that I did regarding Bartolomeo Scappi's chicken that I described earlier. So, and the Scappi one does go into a little bit more detail as far as all of the different methods that he's using, how the salting kind of, the effects of the salting, the effects of the drying that I sort of touched on here. And a lot of those are also, perfect. Yeah, so, and if you do, if at any point any of you need the link, you can also find that information on my webpage, which is medievalpreservation.org. You can also use that. That's got like a contact me form if you want to if you need to reach out to me. If you have any questions later on in the coming weeks, months, what have you, I try to update it whenever I have new information, whenever, like if I have a new project, something like that. Again, it does also have the documentation that I linked in the slide. So that being said, do any of you have any questions? Questions, comments, concerns? Going once. Going twice.
I know.
Hey, Antonio.
Oh, okay. We got a
ladies first.
Thank you very much. I noticed that the recipe specifically called for red wine vinegar with the parsnips.
Yes, and that tends to be my go-to is red wine vinegar, or a wine vinegar of some capacity. Now, that being said, if you wanted to experiment, or if it's all you could get, something like a cider vinegar or a rice wine vinegar, anything that's diluted to 5 or 6% acidity, will give you that pH. And I generally advise against using white distilled vinegar or cider flavored vinegar. They'll work. There's nothing wrong with using them sort of like mundanely, but a lot of the period recipes, what you would end up with is something very, very harsh and unpleasant because of the nature, because of sort of the general harshness of white distilled vinegar.
When you say cider flavored vinegar, are you meaning all apple cider vinegars?
No. So sometimes what you will find is some companies will make what is called cider flavored vinegar, and what they'll do is they will take white distilled vinegar and put in cider flavoring. So like if you bought something like Bragg's cider vinegar, that's good. Like that's some really good cider vinegar. But I know some companies like Heinz and the like will make a very inexpensive cider flavored vinegar, which if you get it really cheap, it's something to be aware of. Now, I've not used it myself, but knowing how it's made makes me a little leery. So I usually, like, I've got a couple of brands like Bragg's that I trust to be true cider vinegars. Or you could make them yourself if you, take a bottle or cans of cider, of hard cider, and, leave it open with like a cloth covering. It'll eventually turn sour into vinegar for you.
Okay. I use cider vinegar when I make cheese or
Okay,
certain cheeses. So
sure.
I've got a good one.
Perfect.
What is the aesthetics of the red wine with the parsnips? Does it take on like a beet-like color?
It does. It does. It does take sort of a purplish color. So yeah, your parsnips will change colors. Most definitely using a red wine vinegar.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Looks like we have some questions from Antonio Sforza. I'd like to ask a question. When it comes to working with things such as E. coli and things of that nature, what are the best practices to ensure safety of the final product? And also, you have a second question. We'll get to the second question after the first. So as far as ensuring safety, the best thing that you can really do is to is if you have a pressure canner, use it. Bar none, use a pressure canner. When you get up to pressure, when you get up to temperature, let it run for I want to say it's like 15 or 20 minutes, like 15 psi. A little bit longer if it's under less pressure. But if nothing else, follow the directions that come with your pressure canner. But that would be the best modern practice to ensure the safety of any pickled goods. If you're pickling meat as well, I highly advise the use of, it's called prog powder, or sometimes it'll be called pink curing salt. Make sure you're getting, if you like go to Google and you Google prog powder, I'll spell that out for you so you want prog powder. It is a sodium nitrite mixture. I usually use prog powder number 2 since it has both. And that will, that's got the nitrites in there to preserve the meat, to help reduce the chance of Clostridium botulinum, growing and reproducing. But again, if you're pickling meat, you can definitely follow that up with your pressure canning to get that high temperature for enough time to make sure that you are destroying the neurotoxins, destroying the other various pathogens. Also, when it comes to fermentation, do you ever encounter a situation where alcohol is inadvertently produced? If so, how does that affect the food you're preserving? I personally have not. So the lactofermentation, you're tapping into, you're using a different bacteria, and depending on what you're making, if you get yeast, which is what produces the alcohol, it can actually sort of ruin your lactofermentation. So as far as preventing that, uh, what you could do um, is, purposefully incorporate, like buy a commercial lactobacillus culture, incorporate that into what you're into the, your cabbage or whatever you're lactofermenting, to sort of give that a leg up, and then keep that like under an airlock, whether it's like, keeping it in water and submerged with like a bag or a plate or something like that, to keep yeast from getting in, and then just scraping the top, or getting like a brewer's bucket with one of the various kinds of airlocks that you can get from brewery supply stores, whether it's an S airlock or a 3-part airlock, to help reduce the chance of airborne yeast contaminating a lacto fermentation. So one more question by Antonio, and then Lady Vladis will get to your question on whey pickling. So also, when it comes to preserving foods by pickling, are there any foods which should definitely not be pickled as opposed to those which are typically pickled? Not to my knowledge. Oh, Dr. Best also has a question. Okay, so we'll finish up Antonio's question, Vladis, and then yes, we will get to your question, Dr. Best. So as far as things that definitely should not be pickled, I have not encountered anything that is a distinct "don't pickle this." Just the biggest thing is, if you're pickling something, be cognizant of any additional steps you might have to take. So if, like with the asparagus, make sure that you're, do the drying. It gives you a much better chance of success. Anything like that, it's good. It's good practice to dry them, or incorporate a healthy amount of salt. Maybe do some pre-salting, like with the chicken. And you can definitely, I mean, if you wanted to, you could pickle fruits. You could definitely take. There's it's a middle, like a Persian, I believe, some sort of Middle Eastern. I don't recall the origin exactly, but there is like a pickled lemon recipe that involves quartering the lemon and packing them with salt, and then packing them in a jar with lemon juice. And so again, it's making use of the pH of the lemon, as well as the salinity. So from a cheesemaker, any words on whey pickling? I've heard of it, but have been leery of it without a description of the process. So I have had it described to me as well. I have only done it once, and that I'm going to say is because I haven't tried it. I haven't tried the finished product yet. But that has been with beef. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, I came across this source that makes a plausible case for whey pickling of meats. Have you tried?" I'm like, I told him I hadn't, and he had tried it. I don't know if he's actually eaten it yet, but it is something I do have sitting in my fridge. It definitely does turn the liquid a unpleasing color because of the liquid from the meat being pulled out into the whey, sort of turning it this very muddy, unpleasant color. But I have not tried it yet. I've not served it up yet, but it's still sitting quietly in my fridge while I forget sometimes that it's there. Dr. Henry Best, your meat paper talks about having to boil the meat several times before serving. Do you have a recipe for pickled meats that could be served out of the jar? Especially interested in serving smoked duck that has been pickled with having little to no work to do on it at Penzic. So one thing with preserving meats is a lot of times it will call for repeated boilings, and it is particularly common with salted meats. And so that the issue with the boiling the meats repetitively is mostly to draw out the excess salt or the excess vinegar. So serving smoked duck that has been pickled. So what you could probably do is if you are to smoke the duck like you were making sort of a duck jerky, you could probably, like, you would theoretically have the water activity be low enough where you could apply a more basic pickle like Calamella's, or you could just theoretically serve it out of the jar. Now, there is a little bit of an issue with Clostridium botulinum, as with any sort of preserved meat. But if you have it as something, if you smoke the duck and have it prepared in such a way that you could eat it then and there and have it keep on its own for a time, then I would say it's probably safe enough that you could just throw it into the pickle, throw into the brine vinegar mixture, and then just have it be in there for maybe a week or so, and then pull it out and serve it. I would definitely still suggest using the prod powder, much like with any other preserved meat, just as a safety measure, to ensure, I don't want to say ensure food safety, but to help hedge your bets as far as food safety goes, particularly with Clostridium botulinum. We tried pickling mushrooms and have a real problem with them greatly reducing in size during processing. We end up with a jar that's only got a third mushrooms. Suggestion for changing our procedure. So everything I am going to suggest at this point is going to be purely speculation, because I don't like mushrooms. There have been some times where I'm okay with the taste of mushrooms, but it is very much a texture thing. So I don't keep mushrooms. But what you could probably do is, I don't know if you'll be able to get around this shrinkage, just because I know that, with mushrooms, there's a significant amount of sort of air in them. But what might be something you could do is to prepare your mushrooms as you always have, and then honestly, you might be able to take your jars after the mushrooms have shrunk and open the jars, consolidate them, and reprocess. That's about the best way I could think of handling that, without having any sort of firsthand mushroom pickling experience myself. That so that I wish I had a better answer for you. I wish I had something a little bit more concrete, but yeah, because I don't know how well they would dry, especially something like, like a button or a portobello. I don't know how well. I don't know how well that. Yep. So okay. Well, yeah. Then give that a go. I hope that works out for you. But that would be sort of my next the next step that I would think to take if something like that were to happen with me pickling something of my own, would be to process them and then consolidate and reprocess. So yeah, thank you all very much for attending. If we don't have any more questions, do one last chance for anyone else who has any questions to speak now. Otherwise, again, if you think of a question later, check out medievalpreservation.org. And again, thank you all for very much for attending this class. And thank you, Oswin, as Rum Chancellor, for giving me this opportunity to help spread my knowledge with those who would happily hear the ramblings, these ramblings of mine. So again, thank you all very much.